describe myself, I knew I wanted to work in information technology. But there was a big, big problem. Because for me, this is what working in an information technology business meant. Working with much older men and being the only girl in business school. Now, you have to keep in mind, I was 14. Now, I don't know about you, but when I was a teenager, it was all about fitting in and not being the odd one out. You wanted to be with the cool kids, you wanted to be with everyone else, and not be the weirdo in the class. So for me, that fear of being the only girl or working on a team with much older men was real. After all, I know no women who worked in technology. I literally only knew men. Now, as I was preparing this talk, I asked myself, well, wait a minute. After all, you were 14. You lived in a town outside of the big city. What if your assessment of the situation of that there was no women in technology was wrong? What if you were the problem? So I did a little bit of research, and I found the statistics for the for the country where I grew up in. But before I show you that, I want to do a little quiz, because have you noticed, I kept on saying the country where I grew up in, but I didn't tell you which country it is. Now, obviously, for those of you who might know me here, you don't get to guess. But for all the others who don't know it, I'm gonna give you 3 hints, and let's see if you get it right. And maybe Emily has some swag for you, because I don't. So, first of all, first hint is, it's a European country. Second, and this is gonna make it a bit more interesting, we have the highest consume per person when it comes to chocolate worldwide. Yeah, Switzerland, exactly. The third hint would have been, obviously, cheese. Melted cheese on top of potatoes or dipping bread in melted cheese, but anyway. So you're all web-fed, so you don't need any fondue. So exactly, these are the statistics for Switzerland. And we have on the left side for apprenticeship, so this is typically a 4-year apprenticeship that you enroll in, and then on the right side we have university. The year is 1999. Why? Well, because that's the year I, back then at 15, enrolled in my studies. So we see 7.3% of the students that enrolled in apprenticeship were female, and 10.9% in university who started studying information technology. So when I saw this statistic, I thought to myself, well, 14-year-old you was probably spot on with your assessment of the situation, because I most likely would have been the only girl in school, and probably, or definitely, would have been the only young girl in a team with much older men. But surely, 2022, things are much better. Well, nah, not really. Things have improved, but we're not there yet. So we have for 2019 on the left side, and for 2020, the newest statistics. So improvement there, but we haven't quite reached where we want to be. Now, what did I learn from this? I strive to be a role model for young girls and women and get them excited about technology, because I, as a young girl, lacked that moment of seeing, oh, if she can do it, then I can do it. Now, this talk is from my perspective, a woman in technology. But if you are part of a minority group that is underrepresented in technology, well, the same is true for you. You can be a role model for the people from your minority group, that they can look at you and say, well, if that person can do it, then I can do it too. Now, on to my second learning. After a couple of years, and by the way, I didn't tell you what I ended up enrolling in as studies. So I did an office clerk apprenticeship, and typically girls then go on to do stuff like PR, HR, marketing, so kind of like the typical women's job. I ended up in bookkeeping, my worst job ever. So after a while, I was able to ditch that, and I got the opportunity to start working as a hardware supporter. And obviously, I worked in a team that was, well, almost exclusively male. But I was really intent on giving my best and learning as fast as I could. And part of me learning a new skill has always been buying books. So I had a nice big book about computers sitting on my desk. And I remember one of the technicians came over to me to talk about some customer support case, and he picked up the book on my desk, and he looked at it, and he started laughing. He was like, "What? You still have to read books about computers?" And I remember how hurt I felt, because here I was giving my all, and he thought it was okay to make fun of me that I didn't have the experience that he had. Now, a couple of years later, I started working for another company, and I was lucky enough to have managers who believed in my potential, and they gave me projects to manage. So I was an IT project manager. And I remember one day, one of my colleagues who worked on a team with me said, "Do you know, Chanel, what the engineers say about you from the engineering team?" Well, obviously not. They don't tell me. So he said, "Well, they say Chanel is cute, but her technical skills aren't the best." And when I think of that statement, I must say, with the second part, they were spot on again, because here I was. In contrast to them, I hadn't studied computer science or information technology like they did. I was someone learning on the job, doing courses in the evening. So they had studied. They were usually 10 to 20 years older than me, so they had much more on the job experience. So yes, their assessment of my technical skills, I wasn't at the level that they were. But here's the thing. I cannot imagine them saying, "Well, Luke is cute," or "Luke is athletically built, but his technical skills aren't the best." So it's okay to say something like that about a woman. And that's what bothers me about that statement. Now, what did I learn from these two situations? Whenever possible, I personally prefer working in diverse teams, because later on in my career, when I did also work as a developer, I worked in diverse teams. And obviously, diversity is more than just gender. It's people from, that are very different from each other. And in those teams, I felt safest, and I also performed the best, because I think when you feel safe, that's when you can excel. Now, I believe there's also another reason why we need diversity. Now, as software developers, we're creating solutions for problems that a very diverse set of people, of users, need and will be using. So wouldn't it make sense that the teams working on these solutions are also diverse as possible? And I can imagine that most of you here, if you're in a position to hire, that you definitely also want to hire for diversity. Now, on to the third learning that I had, and it has to do with something that I personally think is my superpower, in the sense of that, for me, it unlocked many doors, and it's also the reason why I'm here today, why I'm able to do my job as a developer advocate for Google Workspace. And it has to do with that in May 2015, even though I have been in IT for a long time, I finally decided I really want to learn how to code. I set my mind on that. Maybe you could say I was a little bit naive, because I had no idea how difficult it was going to be. So I signed up for Rails Girls Zurich. And Rails Girls is an initiative originally from Finland, where during a weekend, for example, a lot of women come together and learn how to code. As a matter of fact, I remember there weren't only people living in Switzerland there. Even from the south of Germany, a lot of women traveled to Zurich to be able to be part of that boot camp. And the way it works is that you have these smaller groups, so you break up the participants into smaller groups, and each group has a coach that teaches you the fundamental of Ruby and Ruby on Rails, the framework. Now, by the way, these weren't only female coaches. There were actually more male coaches than female ones there. So for me, this changed everything, this coding boot camp. And when I think back to that weekend, there's certain things that I vividly remember. One thing, I was totally overwhelmed. I wasn't understanding half of what they were telling us, but we were in an environment, there was this atmosphere around us where it was okay for us to say, I'm sorry, I didn't get that. Could you explain it maybe a little bit differently? So we felt safe to be ourselves and to learn together, and to, also be okay to say, I'm sorry, I didn't get that. And on the other hand, with these people who were coaches, I, after a couple of months already, started coaching too at events and at boot camps. And some of these coaches who really encouraged me to get into technology did actually become my colleagues because I did stick to coding and I became a full stack developer for Ruby on Rails. So you could really say this fundamentally changed my life. Now, what is my learning from this that I experienced? Well, whenever possible, I like to be a mentor or a coach at coding events for girls or for women. And for a while, I worked as a coding teacher, and there was a special IT week where schools in Zurich sent classes to learn about information technology. And I had one class, girls around, what were they, maybe 9 or 10 years old, and I showed them how to write HTML and CSS. And that is incredibly rewarding to see these girls having fun with technology. And hopefully that also in the future, they remember how that was and also decide to get into information technology. Now, I personally invite you, if you are a developer or if you have coding skills, to have a look at this opportunity, to also become a coach and mentor. And to make this a little bit more tangible for you, here are a couple of the initiatives that you can maybe have a look at and maybe even sign up to as a coach or mentor. Now, I specifically also want to mention the Women Tech Maker initiative by Google, because this is a global initiative. So you will find chapters in Berlin, Zurich, Nairobi, Lagos, Paris, London, and so on. So I definitely invite you to have a look at that. Now, I would love to connect with you. As a matter of fact, here are my social media profiles. You can scan them. Because I would really like to know how you see this situation, maybe what your experience was, and if you agree with what I said, or maybe you even have cool ideas that I haven't thought of. Now, let's come full circle to what I told you in the beginning, to keep that about atomic habits in mind. If you think about it, you and I, we're atoms. We're the smallest elements or particles of our families, of our teams, of the communities we're part of. Now, if we make maybe little changes, maybe one change that I mentioned here, that can have a compounding effect. And we can drive diversity in tech from bottom up. Thank you very much.